Shadowverse.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and there are a lot of misconceptions about what castles actually look like on the inside. And when I say the inside, I'm not talking about the individual rooms. I've done a video on that, about what were the internal layouts and function of each individual rooms. But no, this is actually about the appearance. How did they decorate? And primarily we're looking at the walls. Now, these misconceptions are very easy to fall into. In fact, I fell into one quite recently. I released a video not too long ago and discovered that I made an error. And thank you to the commenter who pointed that out. And how this works is when someone says I got something wrong, I double check it. And there are a lot of times when people accuse me of getting things wrong, but then I double check my sources and I was like, oh no, the sources are accurate. But in this instance, no, I double checked it and realized, no, this commenter had merit, so much so that I wasn't happy with the original video. And this video is a remake of that one. And honestly, I'm actually really happy this happened, because I've always had this philosophy that getting something wrong can be the very catalyst in learning something that you didn't know before. And not only in the correction of what you got wrong in this instance, but in double checking the sources, I discovered something that I actually wasn't aware of and seems to be largely overlooked, because I look at a lot of different sources. I enjoy watching heaps of different documentaries and stuff like that, and not once has this interesting fact been brought to light. And I'm going to be showcasing it in this video as well. And I'm sorry, because it's such an interesting, I love this thing that I've learned, right? But I never would have discovered it if I hadn't made that error in the previous video. So not only am I going to be able to correct the thing I got wrong, remake it, but now, because I've done like a deep dive and double check my sources, I'm making what I feel is a far more important and better video, because I discovered something in the process. And that's the wonderful thing about just admitting when you get something wrong, double checking, the opportunity to learn something that you didn't know before. And in this instance, something that it seems, like I said, largely overlooked, is thrilling to me. So when talking about the way that castles were decorated on the inside, there's a couple of prominent things that even I have emphasized a lot. And in double checking everything, there might be something that I've overemphasized, and we have to be careful when we're trying to correct misconceptions to not push the pendulum too far in the opposite direction. And so I've emphasized a lot, because it's something that is overlooked quite largely, is that medieval castle walls often were decorated and the walls were, to begin with, whitewashed, and if not whitewashed, and so a basic whitewash is a mixture of water and lime painted just right over the stone. On top of that, they had a type of plaster, which is they mix slack lime with sand, all right, and that makes a type of mortar. And not only did they use that in construction, but they also rendered the inside of their walls as well, and then whitewashed those walls on top of it, so that would cover the stone completely. And so that was like one of the beginning ways that they decorated it. And then on top of that, this is the thing that I emphasize a lot, is oftentimes they were painted with these just incredibly elaborate murals. And I'll be showing some examples as I talk here about just the detail and how colorful these were. It's stunning stuff, but even further than you might think, to the point of being almost garish in terms of how striking it is. And it's a big sign of wealth. Now, I did mention in the video that I've taken down that, no, if they did have bare stone in certain instances, and when they did, it would be dressed, nice, smooth stone. But something that I realize is that there's actually a lot more instances of bare stone than I was really emphasizing. So how this happened, right? I mentioned that painting on murals was very common, and they were really elaborate and everything. And then some of the other ways they did it was just having a clean whitewash or render. And then I mentioned wood paneling, and this is kind of the thing that I actually got a mistake. And this is an issue of which source that you look to as well. And it goes to show that you have to look at multiple sources to try and get as accurate an idea of what the past looked like. One of my favorite sources that I look to in educating myself about castles are real historical castles, the ones that are still standing. And for the most part, this is usually a very accurate and reliable way to get information on how they were constructed, their layouts, and in terms of their interior decorations, well, that one is one that I unfortunately was misled on, because these castles, yes, they were built in the medieval period, but they're still standing. And throughout that entire time, from then to now, they have had different decorations added. And a lot of the wood paneling that I was looking at it, real historical and even medieval castles were added much later. These are Renaissance, Victorian kind of editions that were more common then. Now, when it came to my attention that, oh, wood paneling might not be nearly as common as I had said in the video, what I did, I decided what the best ways to confirm it was in medieval art. And I'm a bit, annoyed that I haven't dived into depictions of castle interiors in medieval art as much as I have recently, because I was so focused on the actual real surviving castles. I wanted real pictures, looking at the actual remains, because I love actual real castles, right? And a lot of the medieval art is out of proportion stuff, and sometimes you can get also misled when you look at medieval art, because time period is often reflected differently. But there are great things that I have learned from medieval art, and we can gain from it. It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal resource. And honestly, people are too quick to dismiss what we can learn from medieval art because of supposed liberties and inaccuracies. One of the things that I have learnt tremendously from is looking at medieval art for the way that archery was done in the period. And so I took a really close look at the artwork of castle and building interiors, particularly interiors for nobility, higher ups and things. Because some of these images might not actually be castles, they could be stone, manor houses or things like that, but they would be representative of the overall decoration style. And in looking at a lot of images, I only found one instance of wood paneling that you could compare to the type that I present in the video. Actually, I found 4 examples of wood paneling in medieval art. This one here is by far the best example that I've been able to find, where you can clearly see this is a grey stone structure on the outside, but on the inside, have a look at the back wall there. That is clearly wood paneling over stone, and the thing that definitely indicates and gives this away is the window alcoves behind the feasting table. The wood paneling is on the outer surface, yet the internal alcove actually has grey stone, and then the very back of the alcove is again panelled with wood. This image here shows wood paneling that only goes about a metre or so up the wall, and we can also see depicted the square kind of pattern on the roof that we can still find on certain surviving historical castles. This image here is a little bit tricky because it shows like a picture within a wall, but the outer wall that's framing the internal picture definitely has wood paneling, and on the bottom level we see wood paneling going halfway up with a painted or patterned mural in between. This image here is an interesting one because it reflects something that I'm going to be talking about a bit later, but on the left side we see a wood-framed type of alcove or box. It's not the best example because this isn't paneling over a wall, this is framing its own separate wall, but it does reflect the type of style that we could find or see on wooden walls, either dedicated walls or panelled walls. So there is definitely evidence of wood paneling over stone in the medieval period, but the thing that I did confirm is that this is not very common or largely represented in the artwork. Out of looking through hundreds of images, these were the best examples that I could find, so the best interpretation that we can give is that it definitely existed, but doesn't seem to have been very common. The thing is though, as I was looking really closely at these castle walls, I also learnt some really interesting other things. One is that in terms of bare but dressed stone, we actually see the brickwork, that's actually still very, very common. It wasn't a odd thing out where the occasional noble who just preferred bare stone decided to do bare stone, he was the odd one out. It's actually almost as common as having painted walls. It was like one or the other. Now, as to the type of, stone on the walls, it does look to be fairly like smooth, precisely fitted, dressed masonry work. And when I say dressed, that means like, yeah, smoothed and made presentable and things. And so this isn't just like rough-hewn stone, not from the artwork at least that I've seen. This isn't rough-hewn stone that we might see on a cottage that has stone walls or something like that. It is still nice looking stuff, and a good example that we can also show in terms of smooth, dress stone is in the Castle Pierrefonds in France, and we can see it's very smooth, and this is a brighter, type of stone. It looks very presentable, because this is the thing. So some of the comments, one or two that I saw in the previous video before I put it into unlisted, was people saying, it's really interesting how they liked all these bright colors, but I honestly prefer the natural stone look over these bright colors. But what's interesting about these comments is that this preference would have been common in the medieval period as well. People have, that not everyone would have liked these patterns and colors in your face. It was a sign of wealth, but not everyone necessarily liked that. And obviously there would have been a lot of people who would have liked the modest but elegant look of just clean stone on the inside. That existed, and also, in addition to making sure we don't let the pendulum swing too far in the opposite direction, the whitewashing of castles, how castles were often white on the outside and had a render and whitewash on the outside, we shouldn't think that that was every single castle. There were a lot of castles that we can actually learn from medieval artwork that are bare stone. Okay, we see rendered white castles, but we also see stone castles as well. Here are some examples of whitewashed castles in medieval art, and here are some examples of clearly bare stone castles from medieval art, where you can literally see the stonework depicted in the artwork. And it's a balance. It looks to be about 50-50, so we shouldn't say it's wholly one and wholly the other. So it's great that, we bring up that, hey, there was rendered whitewashed, walls on the inside, and castles, and the idea of presenting castles always as bare stone is incorrect. That is true. But then to say that the larger majority should always be whitewashed or rendered, that's incorrect. It's a balance of things. The next thing that I noticed is I wanted to look at the type of decoration when the walls were painted. And so, again, I looked at a lot of medieval artworks for reference here. And what's interesting is sometimes there was a plain kind of smooth color, no stonework. And so that means they had probably just rendered, maybe painted, or just whitewashed walls that were bare. Common enough, especially because it's represented in the artwork. They certainly had a lot of patterns and colors. And then I noticed something really intriguing, and that when I say a lot, like very represented in the artwork, is that these patterns only went up halfway along the wall. And then on closer inspection, I noticed that, hang on, there are little rings at the top of these patterns, and there's even loops in between the rings showing that something is hanging. And then I realized this isn't painted on the walls. This is a hanging brocade. A brocade is a pattern. Now, first of all, medieval people, they loved patterned brocade. So this is cloth that has a pattern woven into it. That's what a brocade is. And they wore brocades over their armor. And that's already being adopted in reenactment. People are wearing these beautiful brocades on top of their armor. And so medieval people loved these patterns. And when I was looking, it's like, these are the patterns we see on the wall. And then what I've noticed looking closer is like, these aren't painted on the walls. They're actually cloth hanging. And then now that I knew that what I was looking for, I paid more attention to all these different artworks, and I was stunned at how many I found. Seriously, there are a lot of examples of this, and sometimes we can actually see the rings and so these are cloth hanging brocades that have like little loops on them that you could easily put onto either pegs or hooks that are made into this wall. They could be added any number of ways, and they're literally hung there. You can see those, and sometimes you can't see the way that it's hung, but it's clearly halfway up the wall. It stops either before windows or it closes over windows. Because a window goes down and something covers it, and it's a patterned thing. And it's clearly not like the wall just stopped there and that's where they painted the walls. No, this is a cloth that covers it. So what's really interesting, as I realized that this is a very common way that they decorated the interior walls, we can compare what would be the benefits of this style versus the other style, which is when they rendered it, they painted. Now, need to say, again, painting the walls was a big sign of wealth. It was done. It was a really impressive thing. This is represented in the artwork a lot, and we see some examples of recreations done in the modern day. And some great references that I'd like to share with you of just the painted walls is from Gedalon Castle. They're building a castle in the modern day with medieval technology to be as accurate to what a medieval castle looked like, because A lot of the ruins of medieval castles, they get renovated. One way that you can see they're like a sign of the renovations are these big windows that are on the outside of the walls. A lot of these windows were actually added in after the fact. They literally carved out a bigger hole in the wall, did the masonry out, and added bigger windows in the Renaissance period because these castles weren't serving a military function anymore. Even though they existed from the period, they've been changed and do not accurately reflect what they looked like in the medieval period, even though they are, you know, they're surviving medieval castles of the modern day. So those things have been added. Different decorations and things. Wood paneling is one example that was added. And unfortunately, when you think that if you assume that these are just representative medieval, you know, castles and stuff, we can be misled. It's happened to me as well. So it happens. It's just one of those things you need to be careful on. So having a real castle that shows what it actually looked like in the medieval period in the time that it was built is actually a very rare thing. So the project in Get Along is phenomenal because that's what they're wanting to do. They want to show a castle. This is as accurate a representation as we can, you know, come with all the sources of a medieval castle as it would have appeared in the period, without any of these changes that have happened throughout modern history, which is brilliant. And of course, they're doing murals, paintings on the walls, and I love and it also shows that there was a range of detail. There are modest murals, and Get Along are showing some great modest examples, and then there are just some just incredible, elaborate ones, which really would be, as I mentioned, a massive sign of wealth because like this would give an artist to like work for a year or more. This is where artists would get their employment in a lot of instances, not necessarily making paintings and selling the individual paintings. No, they would be hired by a noble to paint the walls of their home. Many examples of painting on the walls, but there are a couple of limitations. Say you spend all this money to paint the walls and they're really nice and everything, and you have them for several years, and then you get kind of tired of the pattern. What if you have this strong pattern in your face and it's like, so much red, I'd like a bit of blue now. What, you have to pay a huge amount of money to paint over the walls and replace it? Okay, changing the pattern is a bit of an issue. You spend a lot of money to do it, and if you ever move and you really like the pattern, you can't exactly take it with you. So now, replace that with the idea of something that you can actually put on the wall and take off at your leisure. It might cost just as much to get a really elaborate brocade done. It might be even cheaper, okay? A hanging brocade made versus someone actually painting the walls. And then instead of putting it permanently on the wall, you hang it on the wall, and you have the option to change the pattern if you want it to, you know, a different look. So you have different ways to redecorate, which are much easier. You can take this money investment with you if you ever travel. And there are some interesting thoughts about this could actually add better insulation and keep the rooms even warmer on the inside if you actually line the walls with cloth, essentially. Now, some of these images, right, are floor to ceiling. And like this one here, when I first looked at it, I thought it might have been wood paneling, but then I realized the color matches the fabric of the bed, all right? And then you can actually see slight folds in the fabric, and it clearly is framed with the window. And so when I say that this is quite, it really is. And it's something that I wasn't even aware of. If you were, that's great. And if people have already been pointing this out, that's awesome. I look into this a lot. It's a passion of mine, and no one has ever pointed out that this is a very common style of how castles look like on the inside. Hanging brocades. And that is phenomenal. There is this beauty. One, it looks amazing, okay? But there is this practical sense to it for the reasons we've explained. They can change the, you know, pattern, the look of their room as they want. They could take it with them if they ever move, and so they don't lose the investment, as I mentioned. And it's a way to keep the room even warmer because, you know, like rendering would help insulation properties, not very much, by the way, the insulation properties of a room, and then painting on top of it won't do a thing. But if you had a rendered wall and then cloth on top of it, well, that would just help it even more so. This practice of having a patterned brocade appears in other things, not just on walls. But I want to emphasize, it's very common when you look at the artwork. This is easily as common as painting walls, as bare stone. Actually, might be a bit more representative than bare stone. There's a lot of examples, and just bare render as well. But there are examples in the artwork of all of that. Bare stone, rendered, just with a straight color, pattern painted, and this cloth. These are the primary main internal decorations. So if there's any takeaway from this video that you want the basic dot points of facts, these are the primary ways medieval castles were decorated on the inside. So I'll repeat. Dressed, smooth stone that shows nice brickwork. I didn't see any examples of poor brickwork that are mismatching things. So there's that. Straight, flat render. This could be a straight whitewash or a render with a straight color. Patterned murals, both modest and elaborate, and then hanging brocades. So, as I was mentioning, the practice of having a hanging brocade set up wasn't just on walls. We see examples of this in feasting halls, that behind the primary table, some type of stand or backdrop was actually set up to either block the view behind or just it was put on the wall, and the brocade was hung on that to either give prominence or to make the primary table look more impressive. Also, the seats of leadership, the thrones, for lack of a better word, of the Lord. So whenever there's a lot of examples when the primary seat, where the king or lord was sitting, they have a set up hanging brocade, not only going up, but then it goes forward to give shade to them as well. But this seems to be like a related and kind of evolved practice of the same thing. They loved, like, the idea of having a colourful pattern was a sign of wealth, but it was more interesting than just something plain. Their preferences might be plain stone, but remember, dressed nice brickwork is a sign of wealth as well. But it also gave prominence and focus to the one in charge. So this practice of hanging brocades was so common, it extended to other ways that they implemented, which were, as I mentioned, behind feasting tables and behind the main primary seat of power, which is just really, really intriguing. So in conclusion, I just kind of want to emphasize how much I appreciate that this has happened, okay? Because this wonderful truth that I found, that I only stumbled upon from looking much closer at the medieval artwork, because a lot of times I've seen, I'm sure I've come across several of these images I've actually referenced to you, and I just thought that these were painted murals on walls, okay? And I didn't realize that they were hanging brocades and everything, and I only took a much closer look to realize that. That fact right there is so wonderful to me that it is like, I don't feel embarrassed when I get things wrong, because everyone gets things wrong, okay? All you have to do is admit it. But the fact that the error I made led me to such a wonderful truth that I've never seen anyone mention them. And if you have, like I said, great for you, but it's this beautiful fact. And not only is it like, oh, this is just one optional way that they kind of did it. This is a very common way of interior decoration, of how they, designed and presented the interior walls of their castles, that I have not even seen a single person mention, me myself included, and it was thanks to a mistake that led me to it, which shows you the value in making mistakes, and then willing to listen to feedback, and you get something even better as a result. I love it. So I appreciate you guys, the feedback you give, and I've learned more from you, I feel, since I started this channel than from my own research. I love it. I really appreciate it. And there we go. Now we gain a greater truth together as a result. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and of course, I hope to see you on the next video here on Shadiversity. So until that time, farewell.